What up, what up? I'm the Crate Digger. This is Studio to Stage. Studio to Stage is a development series which is designed to increase awareness of artists to standards, norms, and just different things to help increase the likelihood of success, efficiency, and quality. Now, this series has two sections, and each of those sections is divided up into three subsections. We have pre studio, in studio, post studio, then we have pre stage or pre show, on stage, and off stage or post stage. With that being said, all of the things that I share are based on decades of my time on stage and in the studio as a performer, DJ, producer, and much, much more. Listen, this is not all inclusive, nor are my suggestions the only way that things can be done. With that being said, I've seen a lot of ways that it shouldn't be done. Feel free to like, comment, and share. Let's get into it. The first part of Studio to Stage, of course, is our studio. And inside of that, we have three sections: pre studio, in studio, and post studio. Inside of pre studio, the thing we need to do first before even really thinking about getting into the studio is being prepared. Artist preparation. Whether you're a solo artist, part of a band, no matter what your artistic craft is, be rehearsed. Spend time being ready to perform once you make it into the studio. Because remember, your studio session is a form of performance. Whatever equipment you may use, make sure it is ready, prepared, and tuned. Sometimes you may tune after you move your equipment into the studio. Absolutely okay. But be sure that your equipment is ready to move, be in working condition, and prepared for your studio session. Lastly, we talk about having your equipment ready. You have to be ready as well. Your health, whether it's your vocal health, physical health, or even your mental health. Be healthy so when you go into the studio, once again, you're prepared to give your best performance. The next step is choosing the studio. There's a lot of different types of studios, and finding the right studio for what you're going to do is absolutely important to being successful, efficient, and productive. With that being said, all studios are not created equal. However, just because a studio is larger, more famous, or even has a higher cost does not necessarily make it the best choice for you. First, we need to figure out what type of session are we having? Are we going in to record or lay tracks? Or have you already done recording and you're going in to do some mixing? Or even though it's not specific to these ideas or these things that we share, there are some studios that are made for rehearsals. Once we identify the type of studio that will work best for us, we need to identify the techniques that we'll have. Do we need to have a studio that already has instruments, or are we going to bring our own instruments in? All these different types of things, including what type of recording software and or hardware may be either needed or desired, all of those things go into choosing which studio is best for you. So do your homework, do your research, and find out what the tech needs are for your type of recording or mixing session. Lastly, pre-production versus post-production. As mentioned before, sometimes we'll go into the studio to work out the creation of ideas. Sometimes we'll go into the studio to put our vocals or lyrics to something that's already in place. Sometimes we've already done the recording and we may be going in to either overdub or to replace some parts, or we've done all that and we're just going in to mix. So once again, understand, are we going in for a pre-production or a post-production or a mix of both? Once again, that'll help you define and identify which studio best fits you. The next thing we need to think about is booking the session. Once you find what you feel is the best studio for you, we need to book a session. Now, first thing we think about when we book a session is, what is our budget? How much can I afford to pay for studio sessions? And then within that, depending on which studio you have contacted and trying to book with, do they require deposits? What is their pay structure? Some studios often offer blocks of time. So for example, they may say our recording rates are, as an example, $25 an hour. But if you book a block of time, you may be able to get 4 hours for $90. So think about that in terms of your budget and what you may need to do, what you can afford. Now, you may say, I don't need 4 hours of time right now. But if you feel like you may be returning to the studio, you may want to invest in a block of time so you can save over the long run versus paying on an hourly rate and finding yourself spending perhaps a bit more. Incidentals. Incidentals, just like when you go to a hotel, may cover a lot of different things. Everything from some studios asking you to pay a deposit that goes towards insurance if you damage something. You may have to pay a deposit or pay some sort of fee if you happen to cancel. Sometimes those things are refundable. Sometimes they have you pay, or sometimes it's part of the budget or the booking fee because they have different amenities available there in the studio, whether it be food, drinks, or other things. So find out what some of those quote unquote small print things are that you may have to come out of pocket for. The next thing we want to think about is engineers, producers, or other personnel that may need to be there. Some studios have their own in-house engineering and tech team. With that being said, sometimes I may need to go into a studio and I have my own engineer, but the studio may require that their engineer be present, even if my engineer is the one actually working the session. Or I may have my own engineer working the session and their techs are there to help patch things in, run cables, or do these different things. Also, am I doing a studio session where I need to make sure the producer is there as well? Sometimes producers may not want to send stems or the full project in a tracked out format. They may send you a 2-track to practice to or prepare with, but when it's time to get recording done, the producer may want to be in the studio as well. Sometimes you have other personnel that may need to join you, whether that's a manager, whether that's an A&R personnel, whether that's, your videographer. So all these different things kind of go into who shows up or who you need to contact and have ready and available to join you when you go into the studio. And also be sure to ask the studio itself if they have very specific rules or regulations or different things about who can be there. Sometimes studios don't allow external engineers to work their equipment. They require their in-house personnel to do that. All these things you want to have laid out and aware up front. Lastly, but equally important, understand if your studio has union rules. So for example, some studios say we don't work our engineers longer than 6 hours consecutively without a 45 or hour long break. So if you have a long block of time, consider what those union rules are or different things that the personnel of the studio may have to follow to make sure that their employees get the proper amount of rest, break, and all those things inside of labor laws applicable to whatever city, state, or place that your studio is housed in. Next, let's talk about logistics. Sometimes you're bringing your own equipment, depending on what that is, whether it's DJ equipment, whether it's musical equipment, or even some of your video equipment if you're shooting a video in the studio during your session. What does that load in look like? What does that setup look like? Is that something you can do prior to your actual session starting, or do you get billed for that time as well? Be sure to ask those questions and have full understanding of what your studio has, what you need to bring to the studio, and also be sure that your studio can accommodate that. Some studios are not as large as others, so bringing an 88-key keyboard in may not be the best choice if there's other options available. Find out those things when you're preparing for your studio session. I always tell people this next piece. Be aware of what music and or equipment stores are nearby and what time they open and close. You never know once you get into the studio what adapters, cables, cords, something goes wrong, breaks, whatever could happen while you're either preparing for or in the studio. You want to know if you need to make a quick run to a Sandmash, Guitar Center, input whatever music or equipment store, Home Depot, Lowe's, if it's a power cord or something. Just know where these places are in the nearest vicinity to your studio. In case you have to make a quick run, you know where they are and what time they open and close. Lastly, as I mentioned before, but I'm going to mention again, logistics, meals and snacks. Sometimes you have a large block of time you're in the studio and you're not going to just want to, snack on something or sip on something, but you may need a break to have a meal there in the studio. Understand what your studio can and can't accommodate and what their rules are around meals, catering, if they have break rooms or green rooms and those different things. Once again, I always say never assume anything about a recording studio. There are so many different ways a studio can be laid out, set up, large to small, and what each studio can and cannot accommodate. Do your homework. Ask a lot of questions, make a lot of calls, send a lot of emails. Do what you have to do to get as much information as possible so when you do pick the studio, you picked the best choice for you.